Hello, friends. It's Katie back with another episode of my vlog and another Cinema Club Sunday Roundup. Last week, I recognized that Labor Day was coming up, and I said we would probably do some Labor Day film viewing, and we did. We actually watched two different movies about working folks to mark the occasion. So, like I previewed last week, we did watch On the Waterfront from 1954, directed by Elia Kazan, starring, of course, Marlon Brando, Carl Malden, Eva Marie Saint, and a bunch of other great character actors of the time in this incredible this movie is so good, you guys. Incredible story about, it's a crime drama that takes place on the waterfront, as the name suggests. Brando plays this character named Terry. He is a guy who was going to be a prize fighter, but he got kind of screwed over by a local crime boss, who is also in charge of the dock workers or longshoremen's union that he is now a part of, as his just workaday world that he does. So this mob boss, messed him up in his boxing career. Then he ropes Terry into a plot that winds up killing another guy from the neighborhood. And then Terry falls in love with that dead guy's sister, played by Eva Marie Saint. So he's got a lot of conflicted feelings about this crime boss character who's basically ruling his life and possibly ruining his life, depending on what angle you look at it from. And he decides to go up against this guy and testify against him in court, which, as you might imagine, is incredibly dangerous if your labor union is controlled by organized criminals, to go testify against them in court. It's a very powerful story. It's a very well written story, very well acted. This movie won 8 or 9 Academy Awards. It's considered one of the greatest American films of all time. Brando's performance is considered one of the greatest dramatic performances in the history of film. And I mean, it really is. It's really, really, really good. He has this magic. He just turns it on when he goes on screen, and it is pretty much unreal to watch him in this movie. And again, amongst a cast of incredibly talented actors, with a very gripping story and really excellent art direction as well. Really beautiful cinematography, and it's very gritty, but also beautiful at the same time. So all the way around recommended. Just a totally incredible film, but to kind of add a whole nother dimension onto this for me, this time I found out doing my research for this vlog that this film is thought to be Kazan's answer to his critics. He apparently, back in the HUAC, that's House Un-American Activities Committee meetings in the 50s, he was one of the people who was brought before the HUAC and was asked to name names and basically say who communists working in Hollywood were. And he went ahead and agreed with the committee, or went along with the committee. Of course, I should mention that if you don't go along with the committee, you can get held in contempt of Congress and wind up going to jail. So it's not an easy decision for these guys. But Kazan did name names. He outed, I think, 8 different former communists working in Hollywood, which effectively wrecked those guys' careers, at least temporarily. And so he got a lot of pushback, obviously, from Hollywood people who were like, hey, you named names, that's bad. And so it's thought by a lot of people that On the Waterfront is kind of his response to that criticism. And of course, the way that the story is set up, the central thing is that Brando's character, Terry, has to make this decision to go into court and name names. But in his case, it turns out to be totally justifiable and the right thing to do. So it was pretty interesting to read about that and have kind of that extra layer of flavor added onto this movie. It also made me have this complete just no duh moment about why there are so few movies about organized labor. And the answer is Hollywood got spooked very badly by this witch hunt, the Red Scare that was happening in the 1950s. And they just shied away from anything that even smacked of communism. And, you know, a labor union isn't communist necessarily, but obviously it's sort of veering into the same political direction. And so I think a lot of higher ups at studios, when things would cross their desks that had, you know, had a little too much rah rah go labor union to them, they were going, ooh, you know, I might get painted with that red brush that nobody wants to get painted with. And so that would be a reasonable explanation for why there just aren't that many movies that deal with organized labor as a genre, if you will. But that said, as I've already said, On the Waterfront is an incredible film, totally worth watching for everybody. I mean, it's such a important piece of cinema history. Even if you don't want to watch the movie just for itself as a film, it is this sort of point from which so many other movies came from, and there's something there to particularly Brando's performance and the type of method acting that he's doing in this role. I think he really kind of proved to a bunch of other actors that the method, I can't remember the guy's name that goes in front of it, but you guys know what method acting is. He kind of like proved that it was like a real deal and could really work on this movie, and then kind of, you know, changed the course of cinema history with that move. So I'm gonna recommend this. I don't actually think it's a 10 out of 10 in terms of the grade for the film necessarily. Very high, 9 out of 10. But I would say definitely highly recommended, if not required viewing, for anyone who's a serious student of film, and especially American film, because it is such an American movie. I think it's an important one to watch. All right. We also watched another movie. I actually saw a thread on the horror subreddit the day before Labor Day, and people were saying, hey, are there like Labor Day horror movies? Where's the horror movie that takes place like in a factory? Seems like there should be a lot of them, but actually the list that people had of recommendations was pretty small. But the one that kept coming up over and over again was The Machinist from 2004, directed by Brad Anderson. So we went for it and watched this film, and guys, whoo, this was an incredible one. This is the film, very dark psychological thriller starring a very, very skinny Christian Bale. He famously lost 62 pounds for this role. He dropped all the way down to 120 pounds. The guy's 6 feet tall, so 120 pounds on a 6-foot dude does not look good at all. He looks horrendous. He looks like a walking corpse in this movie. And it's incredibly effective. So the basic story here is he's a machinist who works in a factory, and he hasn't slept in a year, and he is slowly losing it over time because he hasn't slept in a year, and he's, you know, weird shit starts happening. There's strange people showing up that may or may not exist. Bizarre things are happening to him. He keeps experiencing sort of like repeated patterns, and just strange things. Is it in his head? Is it real? I'm not going to tell you, because you should definitely watch this movie. We all really enjoyed it. It's very bleak. It's very heavy feeling. Very, very effective as a psychological thriller. I would not say it's scary. It definitely has disturbing moments, but it is not a horror or scary in that sense. But just this sort of watching him in his sort of downward spiral into madness is fairly excruciating to watch. So kudos to Christian Bale for acting this role. He does a great job. And the director, Brad Anderson, does a great job directing him and the other actors in this. And the camera work and the aesthetic of this thing is also amazing. It's very, very bleak, desaturated palette. At one point, James turned to me and was like, is this movie in black and white? And I was like, no, it's just very, very desaturated. But it gives you that that feeling of just, you know, when you're that down or you're that tired and you sort of are moving through your life and it doesn't feel real because you're so exhausted, and everything kind of has that washed out grayness to it. The whole movie is like that, and it's super, super effective. And very creepy. And again, just bleak is the word I just keeps coming up for me about this film. But an incredible film. So, don't go into this looking for like a character to sympathize with or, a big, bouncy, happy emotion. It's definitely the opposite end of the spectrum, but it is, strongly written, acted, again, really interesting looking. I keep wanting to call it beautiful, but it's just so, I feel like beautiful is too positive of a word, but very well done aesthetics, if you will. We all thoroughly enjoyed it. Super recommended for anyone who's a fan of this genre. Recommended if you're a Christian Bale fan, just because it's pretty amazing to see him this emaciated and just sort of crazy and awful looking. And of course, they loaded him up with horrendous makeup to make him look even worse than he just looks by being that skinny. But it's very powerful to see a guy wasted away to that skinny. We ended the movie and Sean was like, I felt like he was like a late stage AIDS patient or like, an Auschwitz survivor or something. Like it's just, it's a lot. And apparently after he wrapped filming The Machinist, he had like 6 months to bulk up for Batman, which was the next thing he was going to be doing. And he did it by like gorging on pizza and ice cream and lifting weights. So there's the Christian Bale bodybuilding method. Now you know. So The Machinist from 2004, recommended. Then the next night, I pulled another one off of this funny list from r/horror where people were talking about workplace horror. And it was kind of a Christian Bale double bill, if you will, because we watched American Psycho from 2000, directed by Mary Harron. Now, I wouldn't call this like a Labor Day movie necessarily, because when I think about the working man and the need to organize labor or have rights for labor, I'm not thinking about yuppie investment bankers from the 1980s, right? And that's what this movie is about. American Psycho is fantastic. It is a black comedy slasher, really well written. It's based on the book by Bret Easton Ellis. I have not read the book, but I've heard it's incredible and I should probably put it on my list. Christian Bale is the lead. It's also got, Willem Dafoe, Jared Leto, Chloe Sevigny. Is that how you say her name? I'm never sure. Reese Witherspoon. I'm not even thinking of some of the other people that are in it. There's a bunch of people in it. They all are fantastic. Like I said, the writing is incredible. Christian Bale is this yuppie investment banker named Patrick Bateman, whose entire life revolves around, looking good and getting the best suit and having the best business card and having the best corner office and getting reservations for lunch at the fanciest restaurant in town and sort of these sorts of things. But at the same time, he is also a homicidal maniac. And he's going around in the movie killing a bunch of people. Starts small, gets going more and more as he goes through the movie. I won't say how this film ends, but I will say the ending is my least favorite part of the movie. I feel like this is one of those movies where the first 2/3 are just like so solid, so good, everything I want in a movie. And then in the last third, it starts kind of turning into something else. And boy, I just found the ending of this one really disappointing. I know some people are confused by the ending. My kids were confused by the ending. We had to talk about it a couple times. But I just feel like it falls flat, and I kind of wish that it ended in a different way. I'm gonna say what the ending is, though. I will say that the film just overall is really great, and of course there are a couple of totally iconic scenes which I think have been memed to death, but it's important to shout them out. The business card comparison scene is just so hilarious and so perfectly taking the piss out of what those type of yuppies are like. And then, of course, the Hip to Be Square murder scene, which was parodied by Huey Lewis on, was it Funny or Die? Oh, I can't remember now. I'll put a link down below to that one because it's really good. It's a total classic and it holds up incredibly well over time. Again, mostly riding on the writing and then Bale's performance of this character. The other thing that I really enjoyed about this film is it got the late 80s exactly right. This movie came out in 2000. It takes place in like 1987 or 1988, and that's not that much time to go by. So I feel like the people who made the movie still have a really good sort of, lens on it and feeling for exactly what the late 80s were like. And it really, really is right. Like, watching it in 2021, you're not sitting there going, oh, but they got that thing wrong and that thing's not right or whatever. And I feel like a lot of the movies that are coming out now that take place in the 80s definitely have that problem. So American Psycho definitely does not. It feels totally authentically of, 1987, 1988, somewhere in there. Recommended if you like those sorts of movies. Let's see. We also watched a really incredible Argentinian horror movie this week called Terrified, or the Spanish title is Aterrados. It is from 2017, directed by Demian Rugna. This was a really cool one that was really effectively scary for me. I don't know about you guys. I don't know if it's just me, but whenever there is a creepy creature or monster or something under somebody's bed in a horror movie and like it's real, it's not them imagining it. Oh my God, they're asleep and there's a terrifying thing crawling out from under their bed and it's going to attack them. It's like the actual worst thing for me. I didn't have like monsters under my bed when I was a kid that I was afraid of or anything, but I just like, it's the way to get me in a horror movie is a scary under the bed monster. And boy, does this movie have a scary under the bed monster. So those scenes really had me like, almost wanting to cover my eyes, but I didn't do it. Almost wanting to turn the movie off, but I didn't do it. And I'm glad I didn't. But boy, I was about ready to jump out of my skin a couple points in this movie. So basic plot outline. It's a basic haunted house movie, but if you kind of expanded the haunted house concept to a whole neighborhood. So there's this neighborhood in Buenos Aires where weird shit has been happening and it gets progressively weirder and scarier. And we call in the paranormal investigators and then they are experiencing weirder and scarier and stuff. And I'm not going to say how it ends as usual, but I will say there are, for the most part, the effects and the scares in this movie are incredible. There are a couple of totally cheesy jump scares, which are just like, oh God, you guys, come on. Including one that's right at the end of the movie that just sucks. And it's one of these things, I kind of talk about it with Sean a lot, where it's like a movie is doing a great job and like cruising toward the finish line and just about to make it. And right before they cross that finish line, they trip. And they could recover and still finish the race, whatever. But it's like, oh, you guys, just that one thing right at the end there that just, if you watch this movie, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's very out of place and it just feels totally fake compared to kind of the vibe of the rest of the movie. But I don't think it's a reason to not watch it. If you're a fan of horror, if you're a fan of the haunted house genre, definitely check this movie out. It's also really fun because it's takes place in Argentina. So, you get to go to Buenos Aires in a movie. And I mean, that's always fun because you're, even if it's mundane, just day-to-day life, just sort of seeing, okay, well, what's it like in another country? Always fantastic. So Terrified, or again, Aterrados, it is in Spanish with English subtitles, but you guys are cool with subtitles, I know. You like this Cinema Club report, and I'm always telling you to watch those movies, so go for it. The last movie we watched this week was Children of the Corn from 1984, directed by Fritz Kirsch. Of course, based on the Stephen King story. It's like a folk horror. Peter Horton and Linda Hamilton are on a road trip, and they stop in this little town in like Nebraska or Iowa somewhere. And there's no people in the town, like it's completely deserted. Well, at least that's what they think at first. And then they discover it's not that there's no people in this town, there are no adults. There are only children in this town. And where have the adults gone? Oh, the children have murdered them. So that's scary, and it's played incredibly well and very well, well acted, well directed, pretty scary. Again, for the first 2/3. And then we run into a problem, which is because this is a Stephen King story, he decided to make there be like an actual supernatural demon or false god or, creature that is controlling these children and is the explanation for why they have killed all of the adults in the town. And I really, really feel like if it was just homicidal kids in a cult who had decided anyone over the age of 18 had to be murdered in their town, I feel like it would work better as a story rather than, oh, we're doing these sacrifices to this, like demonic creature so we can have a good corn harvest. Like if that part was all in their head and there wasn't actually a demonic creature that they were really, interacting with and worshiping, this movie would be awesome. But, I don't know. I'm a real fan of the scary kids genre, the homicidal kids. It's a great way to be spooky in your scary movie. But this movie's explanation for why the kids are homicidal falls a little flat. For a movie full of kids, I will say pretty good acting. It's not always easy to have an entire cast of children deliver a strong film. The one place where it kind of breaks down a little bit is there's a sort of like one of the child characters is like the leader, and he's sort of the preacher amongst the kids, and he's always doing this kind of like corny, like kid version of like biblical talk. I said corny. Children of the Corn. It's corny. And so you have to get past that corniness. But for a movie called Children of the Corn, I guess you should be expecting something corny when you go in and watch it. So I don't know that I'm recommending this one. I think it's interesting if you're a fan of 80s horror, if you're a Linda Hamilton fan and you want to like see everything she's done. If you're a Stephen King fan, for sure, check it out. But if your interests are kind of outside of those things, I would say this one might not be at the top of your list. If my description of it like wowed you or whatever, for sure, check it out. But this was definitely the weakest out of all the movies we watched this week. And I remember the story as being really good. I read like every Stephen King book when I was like 14 years old. And I remember Children of the Corn being a cool story. So I can't remember how the actual story goes though. I might want to revisit it. I don't know. Anyhow, that's what we watched this week. As usual, I'm totally curious to find out what you guys have been watching this week and if you have any recommendations for us. Not sure what we're doing next week, but I did see that Pig has come to the Academy Theater and I've been wanting to watch that movie. So hopefully we'll get over there this week. We'll see. Tune in next week to find out what we watched. All right, you guys, take care out there, stay safe, and thanks so much for watching.